This is an original fictional story created for KR Mafia Boss. All characters, events, and situations are fictional and made for entertainment. Steam curled from the brass soup thermos resting on the black stone lion beside Seo Iwan's gate. Thin white ribbons lifting into the cold as if the house had begun to breathe. Nobody left anything at that gate. Not flowers, not threats, not mercy. Yet the lid was still warm, the smell of perilla leaves and beef bone rising into the night, and around the handle, someone had tied a strip of cream paper with one careful sentence written in dark blue ink. Tell Minu to stop feeding Mira the mushrooms. She still hates the texture and only eats them to make him smile. Iwan did not move for a full second. Then the silver lighter in his hand snapped shut. He had buried those names in concrete 4 years ago. He had ordered them erased from every hallway, every phone, every mouth inside his house. Still, they came back now in neat handwriting, wrapped around a soup thermos that looked painfully ordinary, as if a stranger had set down dinner at the wrong address. Past the iron bars of the gate, a woman in a cinnamon-colored coat was already walking downhill through the mist, one hand on the strap of a canvas bag, her scarf tugged sideways by the wind. She did not hurry. She did not look back. That was what made him open the gate himself. His guards straightened from the drive, startled, but he lifted 2 fingers without taking his eyes off the disappearing coat. Stay. No cars. No one follows. It was the first direct order he had given in his own voice all week, and even the men nearest the cameras felt the edge of it. The thermos was still hot in his left hand when he stepped into the narrow street. The city changed shape downhill. Glass walls gave way to brick, imported pine gave way to wet concrete, and the expensive silence around his residence broke apart into the real sounds of Seoul at night. Scooter tires hissing over rain-dark pavement, a noodle shop shutter rattling in the wind, someone laughing too loudly in an upstairs room, and then stopping all at once. The woman kept walking, passing a florist that smelled of damp leaves and old buckets, then a stationery shop with faded cartoon pencils, sun-bleached in the window. She slipped into a side alley so narrow Iwan's shoulder brushed the wall when he followed. At the end of it stood a 3-story piano school with half its gold lettering peeled away. The woman opened the side door and disappeared inside. Iwan climbed the 2 cracked steps and stopped at the wired glass. There, in a room washed amber by a floor lamp, sat 2 small children at a low table. One boy with a cowlick bending over a bowl, trying very seriously to skim mushrooms from the surface of his soup with a spoon. One girl with a red, knitted mitten clipped to her cardigan pocket, even though she was indoors, watching him with the suspicious dignity only children can wear. Between them, bent over a pot with a wooden ladle, stood the woman in the cinnamon coat. The girl tilted her head, the same way his daughter used to do when she did not trust a room. The bowl in Iwan's hand hit the floor and rolled in a circle. The woman turned first. Her face sharpened when she saw him through the glass, not frightened, not surprised, just ready. She moved in front of the children in one clean motion, the ladle held low and firm. The boy whipped around. The spoon dropped from his fingers. The girl's eyes widened, dark and unblinking. For the first time in 4 years, Seo Iwan forgot what kind of man he had taught himself to be. He pushed the door open too hard. It struck the wall. The children flinched. "Don't come 1 step closer," the woman said. Her voice was low, steady, and it stopped him more effectively than the men who had once pointed rifles at his chest. He saw details all at once: flour dust on her sleeve, a crescent burn scar near her wrist. the knitted mitten clipped to the little girl's pocket with a brass safety pin. A blue school cup on the floor, painted with tiny whales. "I know those children," he said, but the words came out raw. "No," the woman replied. "You know who they were when they vanished. That's not the same thing." The boy's breathing turned sharp and quick. The girl slid halfway behind her chair, eyes never leaving Iwan's face. The woman set the ladle down slowly on the table. "If you want them to stay in this room, take the gun off your back and put it on the piano." He stared at her. She stared back. Whatever she saw in him made her add, "Softer now. And kneel before you say their names." He had made ministers wait, standing. He had watched men twice his age bow without being asked. Yet now, on the warped floorboards of a dead piano school, with rain ticking against the window and the smell of soup filling his lungs, he drew the gun from the back of his waistband, crossed the room, placed it on the closed piano lid and lowered himself to the floor. Only then did he look at them fully. "Minu," he said. The boy's mouth trembled. "Mira." The girl gripped the hem of the woman's coat and whispered the first thing she had likely been holding inside for years. "Did you bring men?" His throat closed. "No." "Will they take us again?" "No," he said, and hated how helpless that sounded. "No one takes you anywhere again." The woman's shoulders loosened by 1 inch. It was enough for him to breathe. The boy stared hard at his face, searching it like a page he almost remembered how to read. The girl looked at his hands. Children always noticed hands first. He turned them over, palms up, slow enough to prove he was empty. The little girl blinked at the scar across his thumb. It had happened years ago when he broke a soup bowl in a kitchen and tried to clean it before anyone saw. His late lover had laughed, wrapped his hand in a dish towel, and told him he was ridiculous for a man who handled danger so well but glass so badly. The girl whispered, "You used to smell like smoke." He almost collapsed right there. The woman pulled out the third chair and sat down between the children and the door, as if to remind him none of this belonged to him yet. "My name is Zuri-han," she said. "You're going to sit there and listen, because if you try to claim them before you understand what was done to them, I'll take them out the back and you'll never find the second hiding place." He should have hated that sentence. Instead, he nodded. Zuri poured soup into a fresh bowl and slid it across the floor toward him. He looked at it without touching it. "You left this at my gate." "Mira asked me to." At that, the little girl glanced down, suddenly shy. Zuri continued. "She said, if I wanted to know whether you were dangerous, I should leave soup, because when she was very small, soup was how her mother called you home. Not a text, not a driver. Soup at the gate." Iwan's eyes went to the brass thermos. The plum blossom engraving at the base was nearly worn smooth. He knew that thermos. He had bought it on a rainy street in Busan because Sora, the twins' mother, said the cheap lid sealed better than all the expensive ones. She had laughed when he argued about the color and told him food tasted different in humble containers. He had not seen it since the night his family disappeared. Minu watched the recognition spread over his face. "You know it," the boy said. "Yes," Iwan answered, too quietly. The boy looked at Mira. Mira looked at Zuri. Something invisible passed between the three of them, some small household vote about whether he was allowed to remain in the room. Zuri made the decision. "Eat before it gets cold," she said. He lifted the spoon. Perilla, beef bone, a pinch too much salt. And underneath it, the clean hit of ginger sora used only when the weather turned damp. His hand shook once. Zuri did not look away from him. She waited until he swallowed before she spoke again. My younger brother drove an ambulance for a pediatric transfer unit. 3 years ago, he found these two in the back of a foundation van that had been set on fire near Incheon Port. They were drugged, feverish, and carrying false names sewn into their jackets. He called the police first. 10 minutes later, the van exploded before the police arrived. The children had gone very still. They knew the story in fragments. Adults always kept the worst pieces behind their teeth. My brother brought them to me instead, Zuri said. He thought one night, maybe two, long enough to decide who could be trusted. Iwan understood before she said it. He died. Zuri's jaw tightened. Brake failure the next morning on a dry road. Silence filled the piano school. Not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that has fingerprints. Minu stared into his bowl. Mira touched the mitten clipped to her sweater as if checking whether it was still there. Zuri rose, crossed to a metal cabinet beside the piano, and unlocked it with a tiny brass key she wore on a cord around her neck. From inside, she took out 3 things: a plastic asthma inhaler with Mira's name written in careful marker, a spiral recipe notebook swollen with steam and age, and a photograph folded so many times its corners had gone white. She handed the photograph to Iwan. It showed Minu and Mira, much younger, each on one of Sora's knees, a summer afternoon trapped in gloss. Sora's smile was turned slightly off camera toward whoever had taken it, toward him. Someone had burned the bottom edge. The flame had stopped just short of the children's shoes. They came with that, Zuri said, and the thermos, and the notebook. Iwan opened the recipe notebook. Sora's handwriting, not the careful public handwriting she used when signing documents, but the fast, private loops she used at home. Cabbage soup for rainy days, beef radish when Minu has a cold, mushroom porridge if Mira pretends she isn't hungry. He closed it immediately because grief had claws, and he could feel it trying to reach his throat. I searched for them, he said. Zuri's face did not soften. I know. He looked up sharply. She met him with calm accuracy. I spent a year deciding whether you had lost them or buried them. The words would have enraged him from anyone else. From her, they only sounded earned. I didn't stop because I wanted to, he said. Why then? He rubbed the scar on his thumb with his forefinger, an old habit he did not know he still had. Because every lead ended inside one of my own buildings. Every detective who got close either disappeared or came back, paid. By the 2nd year, I understood the truth. Whoever took them was not afraid of my enemies. They were using my house to hide from me. Zuri watched him a long moment. She had the kind of face that grew harder when she was thinking, not when she was angry. Then you know why I didn't bring them to your gate sooner. He looked at the children. Yes. Mira finally spoke to him directly. I remember your watch. He blinked. You put it under my ear when I couldn't sleep, she said. It was loud. He nearly smiled through the ache. It still is. Minu frowned at him. If you're really our father, why didn't you know where we were? No man in Iwan's world would have dared ask him that question and live comfortably afterward. But a child had the right. He lowered his head just once. Because I trusted the wrong people. Minu nodded in the solemn way children do when the answer is not good enough, but true enough to keep. Zuri stood and began clearing bowls. You can't take them tonight. He rose too quickly. I can protect them better than this building can. This building has one staircase, a rooftop exit, no digital records, and neighbors who mind their own business. Your house has cameras on every wall and staff who can be bought. My staff can be replaced. Trauma can't. That landed. Mira was already leaning against Zuri's side. Minu had gone back to eating because brave children often look hungriest after fear passes. The radiator in the corner hissed like an irritated old ant. Somewhere downstairs, the stationery shop fridge kicked on with a groan. Home, Iwan realized with a shock he did not want to examine, was not always the safest place on paper. Sometimes it was just the place where frightened children finally knew where the cups were. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Zuri wiped her hands on a towel. "For now, come alone. No cars outside, no gifts bigger than what a child can carry, no questions asked in a room full of fear. And if they ask you to leave, you leave." He should have negotiated, threatened, refused. Instead, he said, "What time tomorrow?" For the first time, the edge of her mouth moved. Soup is usually better if you arrive before it skins over. So he came back the next night, and the night after that, and the one after that too. He left his gun downstairs on the piano without being asked. He learned Minu hated socks with toe seams. He learned Mira slept with the red mitten under her cheek, even in warm rooms, because it was the only thing from before. He learned Zuri made money by cooking late-night soup for delivery and doing speech therapy 3 afternoons a week at a neighborhood clinic. He learned she wrote grocery lists in 2 languages because her father had spoken English when he was gentle and Korean when he was worried, and old habits stayed in the hand long after they left the house. He also learned her anger was clean. She never threw it around for effect. She used it like a knife used by someone who respects sharp things. When Minu panicked at the sound of a motorcycle backfiring in the street, Iwan was the one who froze. Zuri was the one who dropped to the floor, reached under the table, and counted breaths with the boy until his shoulders loosened. When Mira refused to speak for an entire afternoon after seeing a police uniform at the clinic downstairs, Zuri handed her crayons, waded through the silence, and read the drawing as if it were a letter. When the radiator died on the coldest night of the week, Iwan took it apart on the floor in shirt sleeves, while Minu held the flashlight, and Mira silently judged his technique. "You're doing it wrong," Zuri said from the stove. "Then why is it working?" "It isn't." He looked over his shoulder. That sounded personal. She almost smiled into the steam. At first, the children watched him as though he were a long roomer walking around in a coat. Then, Minu began saving him the mushrooms from his bowl. Then, Mira, without warning, pushed her whale cup toward him one evening and said, "The tea is too hot. Blow on it." That command hit him harder than gunfire ever had. Zuri saw his hand tighten around the cup. She said nothing. She understood the mercy of leaving certain moments untouched. One night, after the children had fallen asleep in the room upstairs beneath the faded posters of piano recitals that had never happened, Iwan found Zuri at the sink washing the brass thermos. The kitchen smelled of scallions and dish soap and rain-damp wool. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows. The burn scar on her wrist caught the light when she turned the thermos under the faucet. "You polish it," he said. "I clean it." "You polish it," he repeated. "Sora used to do that when she was anxious." Zuri's hands paused. She did not ask how he knew anxiety from love. People like him usually learned both from the same room. "She kept more than soup in this thing," Zuri said quietly. "That much I knew. She guarded it too carefully for a kitchen tool." Iwan stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Zuri dried the thermos and turned it over in her hands. "Listen." She tapped the base with her nail. The sound at the bottom came back duller than the sound near the sides. Both of them went still. She fetched a butter knife. He took it from her, worked the seam with a control that would have terrified most witnesses, and after a slow minute, the false bottom clicked loose. Inside, wrapped in wax paper gone yellow at the edges, lay a memory card, no bigger than a fingernail. Neither of them breathed. Iwan looked at Zuri. Zuri looked at him. Minu's footsteps sounded on the stairs before either of them could speak. The boy appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from one eye, hair sticking up, pajama cuff dragging at his ankle. "I heard metal," he murmured. Zuri knelt quickly and smoothed his hair. "Go back up, sweetheart." But Minu had already seen the open thermos and the thing in Iwan's hand. "That was in there?" he asked. "Yes," Iwan said. Minu frowned, as if searching old fog. "The pretty lady wanted that." The room shrank. "What pretty lady?" Zuri asked softly. "The one with the green brooch. She smelled like lipstick and hospital flowers." Iwan felt all the air leave his chest. Director Moon Sioran wore a jade brooch shaped like a leaf every day of her adult life. His godmother, head of Hatem Children's Foundation. The woman who had stood beside him at Sora's memorial. The woman who had told him, with convincing tears, that some losses were too cruel for answers. He sat down hard on the nearest chair. Zuri took the memory card and slid it into an old adapter she kept for the clinic laptop. The machine on the counter hummed to life, blue screen reflecting off wet tiles and tired eyes. She clicked through the only folder. 3 files. The first was a ledger disguised as meal inventories for children's homes. Rice, milk, blankets, winter shoes. Except the numbers did not fit the capacities of the buildings listed. The second was a short video, shaky and badly lit, recorded from waist height. A child's perspective. A corridor. A woman's green brooch. A voice saying, "Take the boy first. The girl remembers faces. Moon Sioran." No mistaking it. The third file was Sora. Not alive. Not moving. Just her voice over black screen, recorded in haste, breath catching at the ends of sentences. "If you are hearing this, I ran out of time. Hatem isn't moving medicine. It's moving children and weapons under the same papers. Sioran knows." She signed the night transfers herself. "Iwan, if they come for us, don't look outside the family. Look inside it. The thermos has the proof. And if the children survive, do not bring them home until you know who set the table." Iwan bowed over the counter as though the sound itself had struck him. Zuri reached to steady the laptop. Not him. He closed his eyes. In all the years since the twins vanished, he had imagined enemies in other cities, rival ports, bad blood from old debts. He had never let himself fully picture the woman who braided Mira's hair at family dinners, opening the door to men who would drug children and erase their names. He should have seen it. Sora had. The hatred that rose in him was cold enough to be useful. Zuri shut the laptop. "Now we move." He looked up. "Not the children," she said. "The evidence. If Sioran has found the school, she'll come with papers first and men second. Then I'll meet her first." "That's what men like you always say before you bleed all over a floor and make everything worse." He almost snapped back. Then Minu, still half asleep in the doorway, said in a tiny voice, "Please don't fight loud." That ended the argument. By dawn, copies of the files were in 3 places Zuri had chosen, and Iwan had not asked about. One went to a prosecutor Sora had once trusted. One went to a retired dock accountant who had hated Moon Sioran for 30 years and was too stubborn to die. One sat on a timed email draft in a clinic server nobody important would ever think to search. For a few hours, quiet returned. Then the legal papers arrived. No guns, no shouting. just a black sedan, polished shoes on old stairs, and Moon Sioran stepping into the piano school, as if she still owned every room grief had ever entered. She was elegant, as always. Pearl coat, jade leaf brooch, gloves the color of cream. Her smile could have hosted a charity dinner. Behind her came Chief O from the clinic downstairs, carrying a folder thick with stamped documents. "Foundation Emergency Guardianship," he announced with bureaucratic confidence, "for 2 minors illegally withheld after identity recovery." Zuri stood in front of the stairway leading up to the children. She wore no makeup, just a gray sweater and a flour mark near her shoulder from breakfast dough. Somehow, that made her look more immovable. Moon Sioran's eyes slid to Iwan. "My poor boy," she said softly, as if this were a family visit. "You always did mistake sentiment for strategy." Iwan had spent years imagining what he would say when he finally stood in the same room as the person who stole his children. What came out was quieter than rage. "You told me to mourn them. You were impossible while you still hoped." There it was. No theater, no denial, just the naked machinery of cruelty. Behind Zuri, a floorboard creaked. The children were awake, listening. Moon Sioran heard it too and tilted her chin. "Bring them down. I can still place them somewhere safe if you stop being foolish." "Safe," Zuri repeated, and almost laughed. "You burned their names off their coats." Moon Sioran ignored her. "Iwan, listen to me. Your father was dying. Sora was going to take the children and turn evidence over to men who would have torn your whole empire apart. I saved what could be saved. You killed her." Moon Sioran's eyes cooled. "I did not drive that tunnel, but I made peace with necessity." It might have ended in blood if Zuri had not moved first, not toward Moon Sioran, toward the old intercom switch mounted by the piano. She flipped it on. Static cracked through the building. Then Sora's voice poured from the ceiling speakers, thin at first, then clear as glass in winter. "Hatem isn't moving medicine. It's moving children and weapons under the same papers. Sioran knows." Chief O went white. "Moon." Sioran's hand twitched toward her bag. Too late. Another voice cut through the speaker, small and shaking, but unmistakable. The one with the green brooch. Mira. Every adult in the room turned. She stood halfway down the stairs in yellow socks, the red mitten clenched in one fist, Minu beside her with the recipe notebook against his chest. Her face was pale with effort. Terror had lived inside her throat for years, and she was forcing words through it, one blade at a time. "She told the nurse to stop me from looking," Mira whispered. "I saw her shoes, cream shoes, with the broken heel." Moon Sioran actually stepped back, not from Iwan, from the child. Minu came down another stair. "And she wanted the soup thing," he said, lifting his chin. "She shouted when I dropped it." Zuri reached for them, but neither child moved away from the railing. They were choosing to stand. Iwan looked at the children, then at Moon Sioran, then at the papers in Chief O's trembling hands. "Read the last page," he said. Chief O blinked. "What?" "The last page." Hands shaking, the man flipped to the end. Tucked behind the guardianship forms was a printed statement Zuri had added before dawn, along with a letter from the prosecutor confirming receipt of the files, and a warrant request already in motion. Chief O made a soft, choking sound. Moon Sioran understood before he spoke. "You clever little..."